expecting it to be fun.
It shot off like a rocket. It was getting 1 million listeners within 3 weeks.
As the weeks went by and the programme was established, it became a public duel for the two team captains, the editors of both major humorous magazines of the era, Punch and Private Eye. Here's Danny Greenstone again.
It was actually like buying the entire programme in one fell swoop. With Private Eye, we got Richard Ingrams as editor. With Punch, of course, we got Alan Coren. And they established themselves very, very quickly and very firmly in the public consciousness too, as it were, the bookends of the programme.
But what with Richard Ingrams on one side from Private Eye and me on the other from Punch, and I used to have a say. We all had a say in who we wanted with us, and Richard would get in. Well, his lot was too young. His lot was still on the tit. Richard had people like John Wells, Peter Cook, smashing Private Eye people. And I would have friends of mine from Punch, who were often women people like Anne Leslie, Joan Bakewell, Catherine Whitehorn. So it sort of fell into two sorts of people. The public school, languid side on the one, and ours, who were the pushy, new grammar school generation, trying to destroy the others. And that gave it a sort of edge.
Punch had been going since the 19th century. Private Eye had been started in the 60s and was regarded as young, fashionable, more racy and more risky. Paradoxically, the two editors showed the contrary traits to their magazines. Punch had been given to Alan Coren, dynamic, hard-working, Jewish, to zap up its rather fusty image, whereas Private Eye had been started by languid, louche, English establishment, public school types. In Alan Coren and Richard Ingrams, the news quiz found two radio naturals who were perfect foils for one another. Ingrams as the laid-back toff from Private Eye, who claimed to be immune to popular culture and never knew any of the answers, pitted against the fiercely competitive, sharp-as-a-razor humour of the ever-so-slightly chippy Alan Coren. Richard Ingrams.
There was always a kind of Punch-Private Eye rivalry, because Private Eye, in a way, had been started as an antidote to Punch in the 60s. You know, the old joke about Punch was that it was what you saw in the dentist's waiting room. However much they said, well, actually, it isn't there anymore, and dentists don't have waiting rooms anymore. That was the image that it had, and it was a very difficult one for people like Alan to reverse that.
By the time we arrive at the news quiz, the two roles had been set down. That Private Eye would be scurrilous, investigative, run the line close to libel, and ours would be young but light-hearted. So that Punch was Punch was a very commercially successful magazine. Private Eye wasn't. Private Eye was done on sugar paper the way it is now. Didn't have advertisements, but it ran at a profit because it had very high cover sales. We had lower cover sales, but we had that sort of niche marketing of the rich that meant we had a lot of advertising. Punch was unquestionably more suburban. Nothing wrong with that. Private Eye was more Soho.
I mean, in a way, Private Eye was a sort of naughty schoolboy, and Punch was the old dad sitting in his club.
And yet, in radio terms, in broadcasting terms, when you put Richard Ingrams and Alan Coren up against each other, what you actually got was the editor of the jolly, comfortable gentleman's club magazine, Punch, being the more vicious, in a funny way, of course, of the two contributors. And Richard Ingrams, who made an absolute virtue out of claiming to not have read the newspapers that week and not know any news and being very light and fluffy.
Richard, why is Thomas Williams likely to be thirsty everywhere but Portsmouth?
I'm very glad I'm going to maintain my score of naught. Following this round.
Well, Clement Freud.
I don't know who this man Williams is.
My own attitude was, which is always has been actually, to everything, that of an amateur who doesn't sort of try very hard.
The greater truth is that Richard Ingrams played it entirely to his advantage. I think he grabbed what he had in his head with both hands and expanded it into a character.
Richard Ingrams, your music.
You play these awful pop records. I never knew what any of them were, and I've never made any effort to know what they were.
Well, as you obviously recognise, Richard, that is the signature.